I think it's recording.
I saw it. I saw it.
So you guys, yesterday we started with Henry David Thoreau's Walden, where I lived and what I lived for. And we talked about a couple different spots in it. I know the first part was, I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately. And we kind of talked a little bit about that. So does anybody have anything to add to that? I mean, do we remember what deliberate, being out there and wanting to live deliberately meant? And I don't know everybody's name, so I won't be calling on everybody, so I'm gonna trust.
You know what,
that.
I will record discussion points, so I'll sit here and do that. I'm gonna grab, I'll just grab it.
Thanks. The first line, I went to the woods because I wanted to live deliberately. To front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not when I came to die discover that I had not lived.
I think it means that he's trying to get rid of all of his distractions in his life so he can focus on actually living instead of living for other things.
I agree.
Or he doesn't want to just like go through life and just float through it. He wants to like live in the moment and like actually experience things instead of just taking everything for granted.
And I think that adds to it very much. And
Yeah, like live with more of a purpose is what I was gonna say.
right, having a purpose, having a reason, and to really know why we're choosing why we're making the choices we want to make, right? Another area, well, if we move down there, one of the big, I want to point this out because this was a really big aha thing for me when I first read this, and it's something that kind of carried with me and it goes along with that. So if you go down a couple sentences and it talks about, I wanted to live deep and suck out all the marrow of life. To suck out the marrow of life, that's a great metaphor. And can you think of reason, what does that mean to you? I mean, what does it mean to suck the marrow out of life?
Instead of just living with superficial things, he wanted to like experience the deep things in life, like understanding it, and instead of just
Like appreciating everything life has to offer.
Right, and like Ms. Rod talked about yesterday, it wasn't just about the good, but it was the good and the bad. There was something to learn from all of that. Can you guys think of any other things as you read through it? I mean, is there any parts that you highlighted or you marked or?
he said, I did not wish to live what was not life, living is so dear. I think that the speaker is right. He thinks highly of life generally.
Okay, I agree. Does anybody else have anything to add to that?
Well, not add to that one, but like my own quote, I can't like describe where it is, but it says, if some have the pleasure of riding on a rail, others have the misfortune to be ridden upon. So like, some people live their lives just the way they want to, and some people are kind of just like trampled and like getting stuck in like life and not actually experiencing life, I guess.
Right, for me, that's like the idea of like some people are followers and just kind of go along with everything. Like when, you ever heard anybody say that I'm kind of stuck in the mundane or everyday? Like we get busy. We get busy with life just trying to do all the everyday things that we're supposed to. Like for you guys, it's going to school and doing whatever extracurricular activities you have afterwards, and it's waking up in the morning, doing your day, doing your evening, going to bed and doing the same thing every day. And it's kind of nice to throw something in where you switch that up, those little breaks that we take and everything else like that. And that has a lot to do with the ideas that both Thoreau and then later we're going to cover Emerson, and just the ideas that they have with that. Does anybody else have any other lines or sections of this particular excerpt? Which one?
It's like, I don't know which regions particularly, but
That one up there. The shams and delusions, this part right here. Shams and delusions are esteemed for soundless truth, while reality is fabulous. You guys, do you know what shams are?
No.
So shams are lies. Okay, so shams are false truths or anything else. It's kind of like, you know, like when people say that they put on a facade, that's a sham. Like, so they're pretending to be something they're not. Or we're pretending to have a life that really isn't ours. And that's what the shams and delusions are esteemed for soundless truths. So do you guys know what a soundless truth is, or what do you think a soundless truth would be?
Someone shoot, like if somebody's telling you something like that's true, but there's nothing really behind it, it's just the words coming up like what's actually true.
That's one way of looking at it. Anybody else have anything?
Or just facts, there's no fact that you know is true, but you don't have to actually
So,
say it.
so just something that's known, like we don't have to speak it because it's an unspoken truth, right?
Or like a statement that could be fact but has no merit to it.
Right. Okay, so do you guys realize as we're kind of going through this, you're exercising kind of some of the basics of transcendentalism? So transcendentalism is all about the self, like about really knowing that each one of us is individual and that none of us have wrong opinions and none of us have right opinions. We have our opinions, we own them. And it's something that actually you can see in a lot of different parts in life. I mean, can you think of any place where you're told to just be yourself? And, I mean, who tells you to be yourself and to just stand up for who you are?
Parents.
Parents, friends? Yourself, right? We hear it in our music, right, that we listen to, right? I mean, okay, I'm not gonna tell you that I listen to Katy Perry or Taylor Swift on a regular basis or any of that. I listen to popular radio, but think of all the songs on the radio that tell you to be true to who you are, right? So popular singers, whether it was now or 30 years ago, have been telling you to be true to who you are, to be yourself, and that's okay. And that has a lot to do with transcendentalism. Can you think of any other areas that we hear that?
Is it, the books, like the moral or something? Just telling you yourself.
Right, it's a really basic concept, and we were taught that when we, books as broad as the Bible tell us, you know, to believe and to be true to ourselves and true to others, right? And then, popular books, stories, the moral of stories, fables, myths, all of them bring up the idea of being true to yourself, of finding that true self, right? Just, does that all make sense? Or can you think of any other areas that maybe that is the case? Where you hear that? Do you guys have anything else from Walden that really came out to you?
Yeah, I have one.
Okay.
On page 4, like the last line, in a really possible to get in season. I think he's saying, if you don't work for what you want, you'll never get what you want. Basically.
So I think that's a really good point. Does anybody else have anything to add here? Do you guys see where she gets that from? The idea of if we don't work for what we want, then we really truly can't have it. We really truly can't own it. So that brings back, right. Happiness is a really big part of finding that true self in it, you know, of transcendentalism, of that idea of individuality and being true to oneself. One of the other things to take into account is knowing how Thoreau wrote this. So Thoreau, like Ms. Ross said yesterday, he lived 25 months next to a pond called Walden Pond, and he came about and wrote Walden, and it was all about his day-to-day. He lived, now, he didn't cut himself completely off from society. It wasn't like he never had people join him, he never took, you know, like he never got things from in town or did anything else. It's not like he was building everything from scratch. But he built his cabin, and he traded and he bartered, and he basically was self-reliant. He was reliant on just himself, whether it was by trading or whether it was anything else. And he built his life, and he wanted to live life to the fullest, and he wanted to know who he was. One of his famous quotes has to do with the idea that you could spend your lifetime exploring your own backyard. And if you think about it, if you actually went through your own backyard every day and looked at a new area, you could circle back around, and over time, you could go back to that same area, and it would have grown, it would have changed, it was everything else. You can truly see that even the smallest area, the smallest section of who we are is ever changing. And he takes that, that's just a broader metaphor for describing how we can view ourselves, because we're kind of ever changing too, right? We're always growing and changing, we're never quite who we were before. We never lose it, but we're never quite the same, right? Is there anything else that you guys really pulled from this?
409, I got a line highlighted, it's be it life or death, we crave only reality.
So what do you think that means, Aurora?
I'm not entirely sure, but it jumped at me, like out of the whole thing, that was like one of the only ones that was really a jumping line.
So does anybody else, so be it life or death, we crave only reality. So craving is like really wanting something, right? It's really wanting, really needing kind of. So why do you think we want reality like that? Can you think of any reasons?
Because it's comfortable, it's what you know.
And it's true, right? And it's something that everybody else can, because reality is what everybody else is dealing with. It's not like living in a falsity or anything else like that. I think those were really, really great points. I really liked the points that you guys put up. Is there anything else from here that really stood out to any of you? Any of you? Anything? So I'm gonna bring up one, and that has to do with, on page 404. The start of the full paragraph. Still we live meanly, like ants. So the fable tells us that we were long ago changed into men. Like pygmies we fight with cranes. It is error upon error, and clout upon clout, and our best virtue as per its occasion is superfluous and inevitable prejudice. Our life is frittered away by detail. I like the little short line, the rest of it just feeds into it, and it's eloquent, it's pretty, and it does what it needs to. But I love the idea of our life is frittered away by detail. What do you think that means?
Sometimes.
People get lost sometimes in like little things happening in their life and they forget to like enjoy it maybe, or they forget to like live through it. They're always, everyone's like moving around and doing things and like moving at such a high pace. By detail meaning like events in your life, in your life maybe.
I think it's good, and I have a whole lot, she's the one to say something, so, who
Well,
wants to
like-
add to it?
Like what Charles was saying yesterday about like, that like speech kid that like didn't remember anything, he was so focused on like the little details. You know, he didn't like focus on like the big picture that was like in front of him, like the moment that he was in.
You can't let something, you know, do something bad that's small happens to you, you can't just let it, like, make your whole life bad, I guess. So like, you think, yeah.
Right, you can't let those little details get away from that. Anything else you want to say?
No,
No.
I was just saying, it's like,
So,
This is different, like, sentence.
okay,
Okay, he says, why should we live with such hurry and waste of life on page 405? And he says, we are determined to be starved before we are hungry. I don't know what it means, but I think it means that, that we pace through life, that we don't notice the little things. Like, you are determined to be starved, before you are hungry. Like, we're not gonna notice the spices, because we just wanna put our stomach or something.
I think that's a really good way of looking at it. Anybody else have another, or anything you want to add to that? It's a really good line. We are determined to be starved before we are hungry. What do you think it means?
I think that like, we're determined to find something, but then by the time we haven't found anything, I don't know.
I think it kind of means like we have a picture in our head of what we want to achieve. We just like.
I think you're right. I mean, I think it has a lot to do with, it's also knowing yourself. I mean, how often do we lose sight of who we are, right? I mean, do we have to be starving where our body is actually yelling at us to tell us to eat before we actually know that we're hungry? This idea that, you know, like, we don't notice those simple things in us because we get so busy and so caught up in things. Does anybody else have anything? So the last thing that I really want to point out about Walden is the idea of the simplify, simplify, simplify that he talked about, and about those, like, just, why do we need 100 dishes when we can only need 5? Why do we need all of these things? Can you think of any movements or ideas that are kind of happening now that are very similar to that?
The tiny house movement.
Yes. I'm a big fan of the tiny house movement. I do not live in a tiny house. I don't think I could handle it, but it's a great idea.
What?
What is it?
It's where people are like getting rid of their houses and buying these small like mobile homes, and they're just living in those.
It's like everything's utilized, like there
Yeah.
isn't one square foot that isn't.
You better not have more than 2 people in that house, you'd go insane.
Yep, and they have some that are set up for like families, I've seen them for families of 4 and
I didn't know this was a thing. They're so big.
Like 20 square feet.
I have someone building one.
Yeah, you can like literally like.
some of them are even,
Stairs.
yeah, some of them are even like smaller than a normal RV, so.
Chief, can we go over?
Yeah, they're like half the size.
It's like a playhouse.
It's like a playhouse.
Treehouse?
So it's really actually very similar to the idea of all having complete one-room cabin. One-room cabin and just enough room. You don't need all of the extra. So there's a lot of, that idea and the ideas of transcendentalism haven't gone away. So, do you guys know, so other than the couple things that we've said, do you know anything else about transcendentalism? Does anybody know about, anything more about Thoreau or anything else? Because otherwise I'm gonna tell you a little bit and then kind of go from there. Okay, so transcendentalism basically began in the 1830s. Do you know what was happening in the United States in the 1830s? Any things?
I don't know.
Okay, Industrial Revolution was a really, really big thing. So there's a lot of changes. It was the idea that we were changing from being a very rural kind of farm-based country to becoming a mecca in very urban areas. The other thing is that it began in New England, so in the northern part of the East Coast. And it basically, the reason it started there, it was like the most economically progressive region in the United States at that time. So it was a great place for that. 2 of your main proponents in it were going to be Henry David Thoreau and Emerson, well, Ralph Waldo Emerson, who we're going to be covering later in the week. The actual movement, the Transcendentalist movement, was a social and philosophical movement. And besides responding to the Industrial Revolution, it also was responding to the strengthening political parties. So the fact that the 2 main parties were becoming stronger and they were becoming influential in corporate America and in our cities and kind of outstretching into the rural areas actually helped to build this movement. And the other thing is that there were changing social and moral norms. So we as a country and we as a people were changing a lot, and we were accepting of a lot racier things, and we were stepping away from a lot of those Puritan values. And the Transcendentalist movement was a way of getting back to that natural aspect that the Puritans had, the idea that you were part of nature. So when you think of Transcendentalism, you think about self-reliance, knowing oneself, being true to oneself, and nature. So our connection kind of to that. And they're ideas that have gone through the ages and that haven't gone away. We talked about some of the different songs and music and different poetry, books that have talked about being true to oneself and kind of keeping up with that idea. Then you had movements. You had movements like the hippie movement. It was all about getting back to nature. And that was in the 60s, and yes, that was a long, long time ago, before my time even. But those movements haven't gone away. We're always constantly going back to that. In the 90s, when I was graduating high school, it was all about environmental movements, and we became one with nature and we were protecting. And those things haven't gone away completely ever, but they go through periods where they kind of go through a flux, where they become bigger and more noticeable. When I was in high school and when I was in my first years of college, the first time, it was all about Greenpeace, and it was about saving the whales, it was about saving our water, it was about water pollution, it was about air pollution, it was really all of these things that are still here and still happening and that you're still a part of, but they go through surges. The philosophies that are transcendentalism are actually based on very classic philosophies, so we're going all the way back to like Plato, we're going back to Aristotle, and it carries through, it's just constantly changing, just like what transcendentalism is now isn't really the same thing as what Thoreau and Emerson originally thought it up to be, but it's forever here. So that's kind of why we're still reading it, and we're still learning it, and we're still trying to understand it, because everybody's going to take a new take on it. You guys have any other questions? Or anything that you're curious about? Does that help you understand why he wrote what he wrote and why we're studying it? Are you happy with studying it?
Yes, extremely.
So what we handed out next was the civil disobedience. I do believe that's what she was lovingly passed out to me. But before we get started on that, because I'm not used to the routine yet and I totally skipped over the vocabulary words, we're gonna go over the vocabulary words, and I'm sorry for doing this out of order. But so the first word she has up there is culpable. Does anybody know what culpable is?
Bree.
Somebody said it. Guilty, deserving guilt or deserving blame.
I do.
So if you're culpable, if you did something wrong and you deserve the blame, you should feel guilty. And the next vocabulary word is going to be relish. It's not a content. It is a content. But in this case, it's not. So to relish something, does anybody know what you do when you...
That's like
Get rid of.
No, actually it's the opposite. It's like really liking something. It's something that's pleasurable. So you like relish in... I relish in food. I love food. So I love cooking it. I love eating it. Relish. It needs to like something. To find pleasure. Find pleasure.
You just want these right here?
Do all of you have a copy of civil disobedience?
I'm gonna give Brad 5 seconds.
Why is it 81?
It's not.
So we're gonna take some
You-
time, we're gonna go over it, and I want you guys to annotate and kind of go through. So I'm gonna have you read through civil
What?
disobedience.
Who has
This
it?
is another work of
No,
Thoreau.
she didn't.
Now this is more about
He's
government,
gonna imagine.
and I will be honest in saying, some of the greatest, some very good, great political leaders have taken the words of Thoreau and Emerson and held them very much to heart. Both Martin Luther King Jr. and Gandhi were proponents of the ideas that are here in civil disobedience. So I'm gonna let you guys kind of read through, annotate what you can, highlight anything, for question marks by anything that you guys have questions on, and then we're gonna cover that a little bit more, okay? Should be like 115 minutes.
Give this a shot.
Hi. Was it?
You guys, would you rather, would be worth your time to just read it out loud?
Yeah,
Because then
definitely.
you're focused.
Definitely.
So,
Very not.
alright, because I think they like to read it out loud, so
I'll read for you.
let's not do that popcorn thing, because that makes me mad. I don't,
Yeah, I'll read first for discussion.
okay, you can read first, and I will record discussion points, and then somebody just pick it up. Don't I don't want Brady to decide popcorn versus Trenton.
But then people say it at the same time.
Yeah, that's gonna be opposite.
We got 1:30.
People go for
All right, as long as you don't say the word popcorn, I think that's what makes me go over the edge.
Just say the name. You can't
And have somebody in mind and then be ready to go. Brady, you can go and you get, how about we do, how about after Brady gets done, then maybe somebody in here can jump in and say, here are the words that I annotated, because the more that we learn how to do that, the better off we'll be. So Brady's gonna read, because I think you need, like, expedient will be in there. A government is at best expedient. What does that mean? Somebody should take their phone out and look it up. What does expedient mean?
Inexpedient.
All right, go ahead, I'll record vocab words.
I heartily accept the motto, the government is best which governs the least, and I should like to see it acted up to more readily and systematically carried out. It finally amounts to this, which also I believe that government is best which governs not at all. And when men are prepared for it, that will be the kind of government which they will have. Government is at best but expedient, but most governments are usually, and all governments are sometimes, inexpedient. The objections which have been brought against a standing army, and they are many and weightily and deserve to prevail, may also at last be brought against a standing government. The standing army is only an arm of the standing government. The government itself, which is only the mode which people have chosen to execute their will, is equally liable to be abused and perverted before the people can act through it. Witness the present Mexican War, the work of comparatively a few individuals using the standing government as their tool, for in the outset the people would not have consented to this measure.
This American government, what is but a tradition, though a recent one, endeavoring to transmit itself unimpaired to posterity, but each instant losing some of its integrity, it has not the vitality and force of a single living man, for a single man can bend it to his will. It is a sort of wooden gun to the people themselves, and if ever they should use it in the earnest as a real one against each other, it will surely split. But it is not the less necessary for this, for the people must have some complicated machinery or other, and here it's din to satisfy that idea of government which they have. Governments show thus how successfully men can be imposed on, even impose on themselves, for their own advantage. It is excellent. We must all allow yet this government never of itself furthered any enterprise, but by the alacrity with which it got out of its way. It does not keep the country free. It does not settle the West. It does not educate. The character inherent in the American people has done all that has been accomplished, and it would have done somewhat more if the government had not sometimes got in its way. For government is in an expedient by which men would fain succeed in letting one another alone. And as has been said, when it is most expedient, the governed are most let alone by it. Trade and commerce, if they were not made of India rubber, would never manage to bounce over the obstacles which legislators are continually putting in their way. And if one were to judge these men wholly by the effects of their actions, and not partly by their intentions, they would deserve to be classed and punished with those mischievous persons who put obstructions on the railroads.
But to speak practically and as a citizen, unlike those who call themselves no government men, I ask for not at once no government, but at once a better government. Let every man make known what kind of government will command his respect, and that will be one step toward obtaining it. After all, the practical reason why when the power is once in the hands of the people, a majority are permitted and for a long period continue to rule, is not because they are most likely to be in the right, nor because this seems fair to the minority, but because they are physically the strongest. A government in which the majority rule in all cases cannot be based on justice, even as far as men understand it. Can there not be a government in which majorities do not virtually decide right and wrong, but conscience? In which majorities decide only those questions to which the rule of expediency is applicable? Must a citizen ever for a moment, or in the least degree, resign his conscience to the legislator? Why has every man a conscience then? I think that we should be men first and subjects afterward. It is not desirable to cultivate a respect for the law